Welcome to the Science of Success. Introducing your host, Matt Bodnar.
Welcome to the Science of Success, the #1 evidence-based growth podcast on the internet, with more than 3 million downloads and listeners in over 100 countries. In this episode, we discuss the incredibly important thing that everyone, including you, gets wrong about presence. We explore how to prime yourself for the best performance in the moments of pressure and high-stakes situations where other people are watching and judging you. We look at the results from thousands of experiments over the last few decades to uncover the fascinating truth about power and powerlessness. And we share the exact strategy you can use to shift your brain into the mode that allows you to view the world as more friendly, helps you feel more creative, and makes you into someone who consistently takes action. We dig into all of this and much more with our guest, Dr. Amy Cuddy. Do you need more time? Time for work? Time for thinking and reading? Time for the people in your life? Time to accomplish your goals? This was the #1 problem our listeners outlined, and we created a new video guide that you can get completely for free when you sign up and join our email list. It's called How You Can Create Time for the Things That Really Matter in Life. You can get it completely for free when you sign up and join the email list at successpodcast.com. You're also going to get exclusive content that's only available to our email subscribers. We recently pre-released an episode and an interview to our email subscribers a week before it went live to our broader audience. And that had tremendous implications because there was a limited offer in there with only 50 available spots that got eaten up by the people who were on the email list first. With that same interview, we also offered an exclusive opportunity for people on our email list to engage one-on-one for over an hour with one of our guests in a live exclusive interview just for email subscribers. There's some amazing stuff that's available only to email subscribers that's only going on if you subscribe and sign up to the email list. You can do that by going to successpodcast.com and signing up right on the homepage. Or if you're driving around right now, if you're out and about and you're on the go, you don't have time, just text the word SMARTER to the number 44222. That's SMARTER to the number 44222. Do you feel uncomfortable in conflict with others? Do you experience fear and anxiety when dealing with tough situations? Most negotiation tactics and strategies assume you're already a master negotiator with nerves of steel, but that's the wrong starting place. In our previous episode, we discussed how you can get comfortable with having tough conversations and build the foundation to become a real master negotiator using a simple and easy to apply framework. We discussed how you can deal with tough situations and conflict from a place of poise, curiosity, and conflict with our previous guest, Kwame Christian. If you want to feel more confident in the toughest situations of your life, listen to that episode. Now, for our interview with Amy. Today, we have another awesome guest on the show, Dr. Amy Cuddy. Amy is an American social psychologist, author, and speaker. She currently lectures on the psychology of leadership and influence at Harvard University. She and her work have won several awards, including being named one of the 50 women who are changing the world by Business Insider. She's the author of the 2015 best-selling book, Presence, Bring Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges, and her 2012 TED Talk is the second most viewed talk of all time. Her work's been featured in Time, Wired, Fast Company, NPR, and countless academic journals. Amy, welcome to the Science of Success.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt.
Well, we're very excited to have you on the show today and to dig into the meat of some of the work that you've done. I'd love to start out with presence. It's something so simple and yet people often view it sort of the wrong way or misinterpret it. And I'd love to understand, when you talk about presence and its importance, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think when people hear the word, and it is used a lot these days, especially when people are talking about things like mindfulness, it's not well defined in those contexts and discussions. So people are sort of left to define it on their own. And what I find they come to in their own sort of process of defining it is that it must be some kind of permanent state that you get to if you do enough meditation retreats, and it's like a state that you get to where you're always present, and that's not the way it works at all. Presence is it is inevitably fleeting. No one can be present all the time. it's a momentary state. It's not a permanent state. And it's the state in which you are attuned to and able to access and comfortably express your authentic best self. And now, authentic best self, there's another phrase that I think is used all the time and not well defined. So let me just take a moment to say, by authentic, I don't mean unfiltered, right? I mean, there are times when we need to be mindful of who we're speaking with and be respectful in our interactions, and you can still be authentic. I'm talking about the person that you are in the best moments of your life. So if you think back over the last, say, 2 or 3 years, think about the very best moments. And these moments would be times when you feel totally connected. You feel, it's probably an interaction with other people. You feel like that connection is real and deep. You feel you feel seen, you feel heard, and you feel that you're seeing and hearing them. And you feel happy and relieved. That's your authentic best self. So the question is, how do you bring that person to your most challenging situations where you're least likely to be present, right? Because you're so distracted by all of your fears. So how do you bring that authentic best self, which probably happens in the moments of your life when you're with people who you know and care about and love and trust? How do you bring that into interactions with new people where you're maybe pitching something or interviewing or giving a talk? How do you bring it into those situations?
That's a great fundamental question, and I want to dig into it. Before we do, I want to just come back to something. I think you've pointed out a really important major misconception that a lot of people have about presence. Tell me more about this idea that we can't be present all the time and that it's a fleeting state.
I mean, we're human, right? And so there are always thoughts and distractions that are sort of poking their heads in and pulling us away, and that's okay, right? We would be artificial intelligence if we were able to do that. So I think that we have to let ourselves off the hook a bit around expecting ourselves to be present all the time, even if you're in a really engaging, say, talk, or you're watching a great movie, or things that still fully engage you. You're still going to be distracted at moments. You might have to go to the bathroom. I'm just giving you a really simple idea, but like that distracts you from being present, right? So to let yourself off the hook that you just can't be present all the time. It's impossible.
And how does this idea of the authentic best self interact with the concept of flow?
I think there's a lot to it. I guess I would say flow is kind of a supreme state of this that lasts also a bit longer. So it might be certainly people are present in those moments, but they also may not be interacting with other people when they're in a flow state. And presence, the kind of presence that I talk about, usually involves human interaction and the kinds of pressures that come from human interaction, like the feeling that people are judging us, or the feeling that the stakes are really high in this situation, and that throws us off from being able to hear what the other person is saying. So flow, I do think, lasts a bit longer, and it's kind of like an extreme form of presence.
I like that distinction that the presence you're talking about is about situations where we're interacting with other people, where the stakes are high, where we feel like we're being judged. How do we bring presence to those types of situations, and what prevents us from being present in those high stakes environments?
Well, I think the key is that we feel powerless in these moments. So feeling that you're being judged and being very focused on the outcome as opposed to the process. And again, feeling that the stakes are very high make it really hard for us to even remember who we are well enough to be able to access that person and present that person. And the interesting thing is that when we're not present, it reveals itself to others, right? And in some ways, not being present, which is the same as sort of not bringing your authentic self to the situation, it looks like deception. So I get into the lie detection work, which I think is really a fascinating piece that fits in here. When people are lying, so when they're intentionally deceiving, there are these tells, right? There are these signs that not everyone, but most people sort of inadvertently send signals that they're not telling the truth. And those the main one there is not eye contact. Eye contact is actually a very poor signal of lying because people learn very different things from their parents about whether you should make eye contact when you're being questioned. They learn different things in different cultures. Men and women might differ on that. Introverts and extroverts differ. But what you are looking for are asynchronies between the words the person is saying and the body language the person is using. Because when you're lying, you are suppressing one true story and you're telling another different false story. Each of those stories comes with a set of emotions. So you're basically not only suppressing the story, and you're good at doing that with words, but you're also suppressing the emotions that go with that story. And you're trying to fake another story with words and also get the body language right to go with that. And it's almost impossible for us to do that. So what happens is that we see these asynchronies between the emotions that go with the words and the emotions that are leaking out through people's body language. When you're nervous and not authentic, the same kinds of things happen. So people seem asynchronous. They seem off. Their words don't quite match what they're doing with their bodies because you have too much to think about and not enough cognitive bandwidth to be telling the story and also matching your nonverbals to it. It's too much choreography. So when you are present, the opposite happens, right? So you become aligned and synchronous. Your words match your body language. You're not getting in the way of yourself. You're being yourself. So that's one thing that comes across to other people. Another is that you believe your story and people hear that and see that, right? So you buy what you're selling. If you think about the show Shark Tank, which is, I think, a guilty pleasure for many of us, I love as a psychologist and body language person, I love analyzing what's happening on that show and trying to predict who's going to do well and who's not going to do well. And what I find is that the people who do the best, and this is really clearly backed up by a lot of research, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, but is that the people who do the best are the ones who clearly buy what they're selling. There's no reservation. You can hear their conviction, their belief about what they're selling. And that is so important. That's an important cue, right? If you're not going to eat the cookie that you're selling, why would anyone else eat the cookie that you're selling? So, when you're present and bringing your authentic best self forward, you believe that self, right? That's what's happening. And what the research shows is that is a really important variable, this authenticity variable in studies that have looked at VC pitches or job interviews, that people who are have conviction about who they are and belief in their story do much better. And then, so I would say the third piece, so you now have synchrony between words and nonverbals. You have believing your story. The third, and I think this is so important because people often conflate these two concepts. When you are present, you communicate confidence, not arrogance. So arrogance is often seen as a sign of confidence. It's not. It's in fact, it's more closely related to what we would call fragile high self-esteem. So it's like people who report that they have high self-esteem, but they really don't. It can be punctured really easily. Confidence is a tool that invites people in. It's appealing. People find it attractive. Arrogance is exactly the opposite. It's a weapon. At the very least, it's a wall that you build to prevent people from challenging you, to kind of intimidate them. And of course, no one likes arrogance. No one likes arrogance. And they may not challenge you, but that's not because they believe you. It's because they want to get rid of you, right? So confidence is what you're going for, not arrogance. And when you're present, you're able to be confident and really fully grounded in who you are. And so for that reason, you don't feel defensive when people challenge you or push back. You feel like, that's an interesting question. And I want my idea to be as good as it can be. So let me try to engage with that. When you're arrogant, you're not going to be able to receive that kind of pushback in a constructive way. So those three things together are great predictors of outcomes in things like, hiring decisions and investments. And they're not false signals. If you look down the road 6 months later after those people are hired or after someone invests in them, these are the people who actually are doing better. They work harder, they are more creative, they're more likely to inspire people around them, they stay at the job longer.
I love this idea that we might get the words right when we're maybe being
not as genuine as possible or not as authentic as possible. We're not being our best selves, but it's often the nonverbals that creep in and communicate a different story. And that's why people may feel something is off about a speech or presentation or a performance in a high stakes moment when on the surface level, things seem fine. Tell me a little bit more about the science behind that and behind all of these phenomenons.
Well, let me say a little bit about sort of what's happening. I mean, first of all, the studies that I was talking about, what's happening. I mean, the way that they're figuring out what is mediating the relationship between sort of the person and the outcome is by having experts, code the videos of these interactions on these variables that I listed. The sort of confidence and authenticity and synchronous body language. It's not that the people who are making the investment decisions know that's why they're doing it. They're not quite aware of why they like this person better. It's not something that they can quite articulate, which I think is really, really very interesting. But what it comes down to is that people who feel powerful, and by powerful, I'm not talking about power over other people, but power to do, power to bring that best self forth, belief in yourself, self-efficacy, agency. That's what I'm talking about. So non-zero sum power, which I call personal power. People who feel personally powerful are able to be present, and people who feel powerless are just not able to be present. And when you look at the research on power, which is, and I'm not just talking about power posing, I'm talking about a much, much bigger, much broader area of research that it includes literally thousands of psychological experiments from the last couple of decades. What you see is this really fascinating pattern. And the pattern is this: when people feel powerful, it affects their feelings, their thoughts, their behaviors, and even their physiology. When they feel powerless, it also affects those things, but in the opposite way. And let me describe it this way. When you feel powerful, it activates what we call the behavioral approach system. So you feel more optimistic and more happy and more confident. You think more openly, more creatively. You do better on cognitive tasks. You generally see the world as a place that's filled with opportunities, not threats. You see new people not as potential predators or competitors. You see them as potential allies and friends. You are much more likely just to take action. When you feel powerless, you don't act. You freeze or you flee, right? So you don't take action when you feel powerless. When you feel powerful, you do, including power on behalf of others. So think about all of the research on bystander non-intervention. So why do bystanders not intervene when they see a clear emergency? When you look at some of this research on adults, you find that one of the strongest predictors is that people don't intervene. They don't act because they feel powerless. People who feel powerful are much more likely to step in and help a victim. So this is not just a selfish kind of, or a self-serving outcome. The last is that it affects your physiology, and in exactly the same way. So people feel stronger, they feel less stressed, but you also see that their cortisol levels are lower. So that's your one of your stress hormones. Their cortisol reactivity is less strong. So in other words, when something stressful happens, their cortisol doesn't spike as high as it does for somebody who feels powerless. They live longer. They have a lower rate of stress-related illness. So all of that together, again, think of it as power allows you to expand and approach the world, right? So the world becomes bigger and friendlier to you. Powerlessness does the opposite. So when you feel powerful, you can be present. When you feel powerless, it absolutely blocks you from being present.
Hey everyone, I wanted to take a quick second and tell you about this episode's incredible sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a math and science enrichment learning platform. Brilliant is unique in that it teaches you these concepts through solving fascinating and challenging problems. We'll be featuring a new sample problem to our email subscribers every week as part of Brilliant's support for the show, so be sure to check those out. Listeners have loved solving these sample problems in the past, and Brilliant's problems feature all kinds of cool scenarios from poker games to World War II airplanes. In fact, Brilliant explores many topics, including computer science, probability, machine learning, physics, and much more. It's a great way to learn and an addictive, interactive experience that's enjoyed by millions of students, professionals, and enthusiasts around the world. You can get started today by going to brilliant.org/science of success for free. When you visit our link for a limited time, you'll also get 20% off of an annual subscription when you sign up, just for being a Science of Success listener. Brilliant also has these amazing principles of learning, which showcase their passion and dedication to teach people these vitally important STEM skills. One of them is cultivating curiosity. From world champions to creative geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, curiosity is such an important skill. Another great learning principle from Brilliant is that math and science learning should be community-driven. Their incredibly engaged community is a great resource for chatting, learning, and connecting when you're stuck or can't solve one of their thought-provoking puzzles. Check out some of the amazing stuff going on at Brilliant. Right now, you can go to brilliant.org/science of success to get started absolutely for free and save 20% off your annual subscription just for being a Science of Success subscriber. Once again, that's brilliant.org/science of success for some incredible math and science learning. Be sure to check it out. Brilliant's been an incredible sponsor of the show for a long time, so check out what they're working on. It's really cool stuff.
Before we get too much deeper, I think it's worthwhile to dig into the difference between what you call personal power or power and what many people might have as a traditional understanding or colloquial definition of power.
Yeah. So it's funny when I ask people, if we're doing a free association and I say the word power, what's the next word you think of? And the word that comes up most often is corruption.
That's what I thought of.
Yeah. Did you? Right.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating, right? Because what that says to me is, wow, that's the people have one definition of power. They think of power as, political power. They think of it as hierarchical power. And then the cases that are most salient to them are those where you see a powerful person behaving in a way that involves corruption. The truth is that power does not corrupt. Power reveals. Power reveals who you are. Power only corrupts when it's interacting with other forces like, certain personalities and all kinds of societal and economic pressures and structures that facilitate corruption. So the first thing is to make peace with the idea of power. It's okay to feel powerful. But the second is to realize that power is not just power over others. It's not just controlling others or controlling resources. It is, again, it's about you feeling that you control your own resources, right? Your own inner resources. It's the feeling that you have some control in your life, that you're not being controlled by other forces, that you're making those decisions and that you have this intrinsic feeling of motivation and control. So that's the kind of power that I'm talking about. And that kind of power certainly doesn't corrupt. Generally, I think it's good for all of us to feel that way and for you to want the people in your organization to feel that way. This is, again, not zero sum. It's not hierarchical. Everyone in your organization, the people who work for you, can feel powerful, and it's taking nothing away from anyone else. It's only contributing to their ability to be present, to be passionate, to show up, to do their best.
Tell me more about the approach system and this idea that we expand into the world when we feel powerful.
I really think of it in this I imagine this person stepping forward and opening their arms, and well, this sounds totally corny and I never thought of it this way, but the scene from Titanic where Leonardo DiCaprio and, where they're standing at the front with their arms open. I mean, that's a moment of feeling really powerful, like very confident and connected and having a sense of agency and freedom, right? So think of it as a kind of power liberates you to be who you are. It frees you. That's really what the approach system is about. It's about not going into your terrified, fight, flee, or faint mode. So it's kind of the opposite of that. And what happens in these stressful situations, like, say, let's just use job interview, which is a stressful situation that almost everyone will encounter at some time in their lives. Job interviews they basically activate that fight, flee, or faint system. And the thing is, that's adaptive if you are actually being chased by a tiger, right, that's what you should do. You should run. But when you're in an interaction like a job interview, that system doesn't help you at all. Right? It's kind of a flaw in the way that we're wired. And so what you got to figure out is sort of how do you get in there and turn off that response and instead respond as someone who has composure, has confidence, has this feeling of power, knows that no matter what happens in this situation, they're not going to die, right? They're not going to die if they don't get the job.
I want to look at the flip side of this and start to understand, why don't people have power? Why do people lose power? Why do people feel powerless?
One thing is that when we begin to feel powerless, we consent to that feeling. So we don't notice it as something that we should resist, and we do just allow ourselves to fall into it. One of the things that I would love to do is it just in the world is to get people to understand that people's psychological well-being, their subjective well-being, is not just about happiness and lack of stress. Because that's how people generally think of it. When they think about like, how well do you feel? They think, well, I'm happy and I'm not very stressed. Those two things are important. I think there's now, quite a bit of research on the importance of feeling a sense of purpose. So there's discussion about that. But what I don't often hear people talk about, and what ends up being a really important predictor of thriving, is that people also feel that sense of agency. They feel they can get things done. So think about if you were trying to increase the well-being of a struggling society, and you wanted to measure the long-term outcomes of that. You wouldn't just want to make them feel happy and less stressed. You'd also want to make them feel powerful, right? You want them to feel that they can change their situation, they can get things done, not just continue to live as they are, right? So power is such an important piece of your general well-being. So as you start to feel less powerful, and again, personally powerful, note that. Like, start to pay attention to the moments when you collapse. Like, when do you start to slouch? When do you start to, lower your eyes and maybe, wrap yourself with your your torso with your arms? Think about what people do when their team is losing, or when they are on the losing team in sports. Sports has so much to teach us about these things. And I'm a huge baseball fan. So I just finished watching the World Series and my team won. Go Red Sox. But it was very fun to watch what was happening in the stands. Because you see, as your team is struggling, everyone, all of a sudden, they have their hands on their faces. They're covering their eyes. They're touching their necks. They're doing all kinds of sort of contractive body language. And that's a sign of feeling powerless. It's what animals do when they don't have power. They're hiding themselves. They're making themselves invisible. They're making themselves small. That's a sign of feeling powerless. So when you notice that you're starting to do that, two things. Try to figure out what was the stimulus that led you to react that way, what caused you to react that way, because that gets you to know yourself and what are the cues that you should sort of get in touch with to understand when you're losing that sense of power. But also, don't allow yourself to collapse. So that's exactly when you actually need to sort of physically expand. So say you're giving a talk and you start to, realize that you're doing nervous things like touching your arm with your opposite hand, or touching your face, or maybe you're speaking very quickly, which is another way of contracting. Instead of doing those things, slow down, open up your shoulders, take some deep, expansive breaths, and all of that will reset you. It triggers a relaxation response. It allows you to collect yourself, collect your thoughts. It certainly does not signal powerlessness to an audience, because pausing and slowing down does exactly the opposite. It signals power. But all of those things are ways in which you can resist sort of collapsing into that feeling of powerlessness.
And what, from a larger perspective, outside of just moments of powerlessness, what causes people to be or feel powerless in their lives?
Well, lots of things. And I don't want to dismiss all of the structural and institutional and real things that make us feel powerless, like systematic prejudices and all kinds of unfair inequalities, illness, right? So losing a job. In fact, chronic unemployment is the strongest predictor of unhappiness and powerlessness, especially for men. That's a very strong predictor of, long-term power, sort of feelings of powerlessness and depression. So there are a lot of things that can do it, but I'm not saying that it's easy to make yourself feel powerful, but you have to try. You have to at least resist that urge to contract and hide and go into the fetal position.
And I think my perspective on it, at least, and I'm curious what your perspective is, the most effective strategy if you're in a tough situation like that is to try and create agency for yourself, try and create action, try and create results. And having the mindset of, or being in a place of powerlessness is often the most counterproductive thing you can do in those types of scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's because you're also ceding control of your own outcome and your own thoughts. And you end up leaving those situations with a sense of regret as opposed to a sense of satisfaction. One of the interesting things about these stressful situations where people feel present or not present, or powerful or not powerful, is that when people feel powerless, they don't feel like they've been seen. So they leave something like a job interview feeling like, oh, I wish I had shown them who I am. So they leave with a sense of regret, and they can't get themselves out of the cycle of wanting a do-over. But you don't get a do-over. You just have to move on and not pick up like another piece of baggage that you carry in with you to the next situation that looks the same way. But people often, that sense of regret is all about what happened in that moment. It's not actually about the outcome. So when people feel present and powerful in something like a job interview, when they leave, they feel satisfied and they feel much more accepting of the outcome, even if it's not the one they desired. They feel that what happened was fair, that they were seen, they were heard, and if they weren't chosen, that's okay. It's, maybe there was somebody who was a better fit. It's not, it doesn't reflect so strongly on them in a negative way. But I think that, for me, I very much do focus on these feelings of expansiveness versus, contractiveness, and what you can do to prepare yourself before you go in. Because one thing that people are not great at doing when they feel bad about themselves is telling themselves that they're powerful, right? So when you feel anxious and powerless, and then you tell yourself, oh no, I'm actually powerful. Now you just feel like you're lying to yourself. So it can make it even more salient. So you can get a rebound effect, sort of a heightened sense of powerlessness. So we're not very good at kind of talking ourselves down off the ledge, but we are good at walking ourselves down off the ledge, at changing the way we carry ourselves, the way we breathe, the way we move, our speech, our posture, all of those things. It's, again, not just about standing like a superhero. There's so much more research out there from many different fields that show the same pattern. When we expand, we feel powerful and we can control our expansiveness. So if you start at the sort of from the head down to the feet, some ways to expand. And I've already mentioned this, but speak more slowly. In studies done at Stanford GSB, researchers like Deb Grunfeld have found that when you get people to slow down their speech, they feel more powerful and others perceive them as more powerful. So slow your speech. Breathing, right? Do you breathe shallowly or do you breathe deeply? When you breathe deeply and expansively and really fill your lungs, you are triggering what's called the relaxation response. And that is a complex, circuitry in your mind that's telling your body that you are not in a threatening situation, you are in a safe situation. So you don't go into fight, flee, or faint mode. You feel comfortable. So there you've got just two things that you can do, starting at the head. And certainly even simple posture like sitting up straight is a way of expanding. So your shoulders should be back and down, and your chest should be open. You should basically do what you would do when your grandmother might have told you to sit up straight. Studies show that people who are clinically depressed, if you get them to sit up straight for just 2 to 3 minutes, which goes against the typical posture of someone who's depressed, they feel significantly happier. The same then applies to people who are not depressed, as social psychologists have shown. Then you have complex posture, which is what I've been studying, is the various ways in which we expand in sort of more complex ways, not just sitting up straight. So having your limbs away from your torso, having your feet apart. When you do that before you go into a stressful situation, you feel more powerful. You don't do it while you're in the stressful situation because it comes across as really rude, right? So you're not going to manspread when you're sitting in a job interview. You're not going to stand like a superhero or in the victory pose when you're in a job interview, but you can do it in advance. And even movement. So studies by a guy named Nico Troya, who's Queen's University in outside of Toronto, shows that even walking changes the way we feel. So when we feel happy, for example, we walk in a kind of more expansive, bouncy way. When we feel sad, we get really contractive. So when he has people walk in this way that mirrors happiness, and they don't know that that's what they're doing, they just know they're walking in a way that sort of matches what they're looking at on a screen, they end up feeling happier and more powerful than people who walked in this contractive way. So all of those things override the doubts that happen when you're trying to change your mind with your mind. Instead, use your body to change your mind. Carry yourself in an expansive way with a sense of pride, with a sense of purpose, right? When you carry yourself that way, that's the world that manifests in front of you.
That's exactly what I wanted to get into next. Tell me more about the notion of the mind-mind connection versus the mind-body connection.
The mind-mind connection sort of encompasses so much different work, and so much of that is important, right? So cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, I mean, certainly in many cases, for many people, that's a hugely important part of reducing stress or improving your mental health. So I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but again, if we're talking about sort of performance in stressful situations, we're just not very good at talking ourselves out of feeling bad, especially when we're anxious. But the body overrides that. The body kind of skips that step. If the body is acting as if it's not threatened, the mind begins to fall in line with what the body is doing. We're animals. This is a very basic sort of primitive reaction. I mean, the same is true. There's a woman who is a horse trainer who I talk to quite often, who's developed this technique. She works with very submissive, shy horses. Her job is to kind of bring them out of their shells. What she finds is that, first of all, horses can't talk themselves out of it, right? So they're just not able to, and the horse trainer can't talk them out of it. So she changes their body language through these different kinds of games and interactions so that eventually she gets them to behave in a way that emulates, the airs and graces of powerful horses. And when they do that for a period of time, it's like it snaps them out of it, and they come out of their shell and they become much more willing to interact with other horses. Their health improves. They're more likely to be able to go to competition and do well in competition. It just kind of goes on and on. So the same is true for humans. I think in these moments of anxiety, remember that you're an animal, and so use some of these very primitive approaches to snap yourself out of it.
What a great example. And it crystallizes things because, as you said, you can't convince a horse to come out of that behavior pattern. And yet just with an intervention at the mind-body level, you can create behavior change.
Right. And when you think about sort of just another example, because people often ask me this when it comes to, athletes often ask me this, well, what about visualization? So think about, an alpine skier visualizing the course before the gates open. Does that mean that doesn't work? And I would say, no, it doesn't mean that. I mean, an alpine skier, like let's talk about Lindsey Vonn, and you often do see her before I love watching ski racing. You see her before she races with her eyes closed, and she's sort of, you see her sort of gently going through the motions of going down that course. So there is a physical piece, but she's also visualizing the course. And she's visualizing how she wants to do, as she skis down through that course. Does that work for her? Hell yeah, it's definitely working for her. But Lindsey Vonn is not necessarily feeling incredibly stressed and self-doubting before every race. The point is that we're really not good at that when we are feeling self-doubting and anxious already off the bat.
Another piece of this that I want to dig into is imposter syndrome. How does that play into all of this?
Imposter syndrome is not just about feeling powerless. It's about feeling powerless. It's about feeling that you somehow accidentally got the job or the award or whatever it is, and that you're going to be found out at any moment. So it also involves what we call pluralistic ignorance, which is we think that everyone else who has that job or goes to that fancy school is feeling great and confident and deserving. They're not. Imposter syndrome is so pervasive. When you take places like at Harvard Business School, for example, 75 to 85% of students report feeling imposter syndrome, right? So other people are not walking around feeling like, oh, I totally deserve to be here. They're feeling the same kinds of doubt. So I think the first thing is to realize that you're not alone. Like, everyone is feeling imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And if you are in a situation with people who've really excelled and in a sort of competitive situation, chances are a lot of people are feeling that way. They're feeling that if they really put themselves out there, someone's going to realize that they were an admissions mistake and come and tap them on the shoulder and say, sorry, but we made a mistake and you have to leave, right? So imposter syndrome definitely is coming from a feeling of powerlessness, but it becomes even more complex in how we think about it. Now, when, and it's very context specific. So people could feel like an imposter, say at Harvard Business School when they're being a student and go home and feel totally fine and not feel like an imposter with their spouse, right? It's not that you're walking around feeling powerless all the time. You're feeling powerless and as if you're an imposter in this one particular context. So when imposter syndrome was first studied in the 1970s by a woman named Pauline Clance, she originally thought that it was much, much more common among women than men. But then she learned pretty quickly that it wasn't. It was just that women were more comfortable telling her that they were feeling that way. So women are more comfortable talking about it. And this is one of the ways in which gender stereotypes, I think, really hurts men. So men feel that they're not allowed to talk about those things, to share those kinds of fears and weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And so as a result, the research and the sort of therapy around imposter syndrome was first focused just on women. She realized that as soon as, she was doing, rather than interviews, anonymous surveys, men were reporting imposter syndrome at exactly the same level as women. So men are feeling like imposters. And I think the burden on men, so this whole idea that it's a women's problem is not only bad for women. I think it's bad for women because it's like another thing to heap on top of the pile of like, all of these things that women are afraid of. But it's also a burden on men because if men believe that men generally don't feel like imposters, then and you do feel like an imposter, that's really going to make it even harder on you. So let me just rest assured to all the men in the audience, most of the men that 85% of them probably have felt like imposters.
It's funny. I out of college for a number of years, I worked at Goldman Sachs, and in my analyst training for the first 6 weeks on the job, I was crushing imposter syndrome the entire time. So I know exactly what it feels like.
Yeah. And probably almost everyone in your group felt the same way.
So what can we do to overcome or deal with imposter syndrome other than the awareness that it's so prevalent?
Well, I mean, again, sort of notice when you feel it. So what are the things that make you feel it? Often it's kind of funny and counterintuitive, but things that make people feel like imposters are the things that make you look like the exact opposite of an imposter to outsiders. So winning an award, for example, being recognized publicly for something that you did well, that makes imposter syndrome momentarily or, for a brief period of time worse for a lot of people. So realize that the reason you're feeling that way when those things happen is just because you're feeling because it's public, you feel exposed and you feel more afraid that you're going to be found out. So knowing sort of what are the things that stoke that feeling for you is important. And knowing that, as you learn the ropes, you're going to get over that. One of the people that I talked to in the book is the wildly successful sci-fi writer Neil Gaiman, who's written 24 international best-selling books. I'm sure many people in the audience will know who he is. He's also just a delightful, genuine, open person who admits to feeling imposter syndrome. And he was talking to me about a time when he was writing this book called American Gods, which was going to be his big, big novel. And he was talking to, a friend of his, a writer sort of mentor of his. And he said something like, I think I've gotten over the imposter syndrome. And I think I finally figured out how to write a novel. And his friend says, you never figure out how to write a novel. You just figure out how to write the novel that you're on. right? The one that you're doing now. And so the idea is that it's kind of this game of whack-a-mole. It's going to keep on popping up again, but don't panic about it. Go, okay, I noticed that feeling. I'm going to let go of it now and not sort of perseverate or ruminate about it. And eventually it just goes away. And you might feel it again when you go into a new context, but maybe that's a good thing. It means you're challenging yourself. You're doing things that are making you push yourself.
For listeners who want to concretely implement some of the tactics, themes, ideas that we've talked about today, what would be one piece of homework that you would give them to really concretely use these ideas in their lives?
I think that let's just talk about sort of the expansiveness, the sort of body-mind piece. So I would say, first of all, before you go into a stressful situation, prepare by using expansive postures, the warrior pose in yoga, stretch out, make yourself as big as you feel comfortable doing, but in private, right? Not in front of other people. You want to do it in private because you don't want to offend people, but you also don't want to feel that you're being judged. Do that before you walk in. When you walk in, use posture that you have good posture, carry yourself with a sense of pride, but not in a way that's domineering. You're not challenging somebody to a duel. You're trying to have an interaction where you connect with them, where they see you as competent, but they also see you as likable and trustworthy and engaged, and as somebody who wants to be there, who doesn't feel that he or she is the most important person in the room, but is someone who's there to connect. So huge, big poses before, reasonable, good posture during, and use also open gestures. So gestures, palms up, for example, that show that you are comfortable being there. Mind your posture throughout the day. So, if you're sitting over your computer a lot or over your phone, which we find is hugely problematic and causes what we call text neck or eye posture, people really begin to hunch, and that does affect the way they behave, and it activates the inhibition system. If you're spending a lot of time on your phone, try to change how you're holding your phone. I'm not going to tell you to put your phone down because I know how hard that is to do. But what we see is that people who sit back and hold their phones up over them as opposed to hunching over them, they don't seem to activate the inhibition system in the way that the people who are slouching do. So mind your posture, realize notice the times when you start to slouch and make yourself small, and see what you can do to correct that. And the other is pay attention to other people's posture, right? So when you're in an interaction, remember that presence begets presence. So when you're present, you are inviting others to be present. When you're present, you're saying, I am authentic, I am here, you can trust me. And they respond in kind. So what you want to do is pay attention to times when they're using body language that looks powerless. Like if their body language changes and suddenly they close off, try to figure out what happened. How can you get things on track again?
And for listeners who want to find you, the book, all of your work online, what is the best place for them to do that?
I would say I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm Amy J.C. Cuddy, so 2 C's because I have 2 middle initials. So do look for me there. You can look for me at amycuddy.com or amycuddyblog.com. But I think the book is really a useful and practical and very strongly evidence-based guide to understanding what's happening to your body and mind in these stressful situations, how you can overcome it. So please do look for the book, Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. Obviously, you can buy it online. I always encourage people to buy from their local, their indie bookstore, because I certainly love those places and would like to see them succeed. But it's widely available, and it's now in 34 different languages. So it's available all over the world. And for many of you, even if you're not native English speakers, I hope that it will be available in your native language.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing all this wisdom, all these practical strategies. It was a great conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to The Science of Success. We created this show to help you, our listeners, master evidence-based growth. I love hearing from listeners. If you want to reach out, share your story, or just say hi, shoot me an email. My email is matt@successpodcast.com. That's matt@successpodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I read and respond to every single listener email. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you should sign up for our email list today by going to successpodcast.com, signing up right on the homepage. There's some incredible stuff that's only available to those on the email list, so be sure to sign up, including an exclusive curated weekly email from us called Mindset Monday, which is short, simple, filled with articles, stories, things that we found interesting and fascinating in the world of evidence-based growth in the last week. Next, you're getting an exclusive chance to shape the show, including voting on guests, submitting your own personal questions that we'll ask guests on air, and much more. Lastly, you're going to get a free guide we created based on listener demand, our most popular guide, which is called How to Organize and Remember Everything. You can get it completely for free, along with another surprise bonus guide by signing up and joining the email list today. Again, you can do that at successpodcast.com, sign up right at the homepage, or if you're on the go, just text the word SMARTER, SMARTER, to the number 44222. Remember, the greatest compliment you can give us is a referral to a friend, either live or online. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us an awesome review and subscribe on iTunes, because that helps boost the algorithm, that helps us move up the iTunes rankings and helps more people discover the science of success. Don't forget, if you want to get all the incredible information we talk about in the show, links, transcripts, everything we discuss, and much more, be sure to check out our show notes. You can get those at successpodcast.com. Just hit the show notes button right at the top. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Science of Success.